Welcome to the Principles of Performance podcast, where we discuss how to optimize your health, fitness, and performance. Drawing on decades of experience of working as coaches, consultants, and trainers to top performers, athletes, and teens from professional sports to top universities to the U.S. military, Eric DeGatti and Mike Perry discuss topics and strategies of how to perform at your highest level and be your very best. Join us and our friends and colleagues who are leaders in the fitness and performance industry as we investigate and challenge the most popular training, nutrition, lifestyle, and recovery protocols. And away we go. Here we are with the Principles of Performance podcast. I'm your host, Eric DeGatti, and I am flying solo today without my friend and co-host, Mike Perry. Had a last minute travel commitment that came up that was unexpected. And I'm going to be honest with you folks, I actually don't mind sometimes when he doesn't show up because I get to get the guest all to myself, especially when we got a good one, but just don't tell him. This week, I'm lucky enough to have Dr. Doriana Parkin with us. And she is someone who practices as a family physician in Toronto, Ontario for 15 years. But then in 2022, she closed her practice and decided to pursue her passion for helping busy women attain their nutrition, fitness, and self-care goals. And so she launched her SmplyFit Wellness brand on social media and started a 12-week virtual program called Beautifully Raw. And it teaches women how to lose weight, incorporate fitness into their day without fancy equipment, and incorporate self-care into their lives to improve their mental health. She also hosts the SmplyFit Wellness Podcast. That's how we met, and I was lucky enough to be a guest on there, and so I was excited to have her join us on our show since I started following on social media and putting out some great stuff. And that's available through Spotify and Apple, and then you can get all her links will be posted in the show notes. But welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start by digging in with like, how do you make the decision to make that leap from like the traditional family medical practice to what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in Toronto and I like you said, I worked for 15 years as a medical as a family physician. And our system, unfortunately, with primary care is a bit of a hot mess right now. And it's been like that for the, last few years. But of course, with COVID, things got really sort of stressful and messy in primary care. And I guess I just got to the point where I was feeling a significant amount of burnout. Just the responsibility, the paperwork, the feeling a bit devalued by our government in primary care. And so, coupling that with the 15 years of work that I had, where mostly I worked with women. I had a primarily female demographic. I would say most of my patients were between the ages of like 25 and 60. So, lots of women in my practice, watching them struggle, with their weight, with their self-care, with juggling, work and home and kids and taking care of, their aging parents. So coupling that with my own sort of, journey and love for fitness and nutrition in my own life, it was kind of, I guess, a natural but very big jump for me. It was, I thought, you know what, I'm kind of, I think my clinical days of practice are kind of coming to an end, at least for this stage in my life. And this was the next best way I could think of to help the women I really wanted to help.
Awesome. Well, so if you, as I mentioned earlier, if you follow Doriana's content on social media, right, you're kind of well known for pointing out bullshit. All right, for being promoted on health and nutrition. All right, it kind of very Lane Norton-esque. And so, what do you see as some of like the most alarming claims being made by the internet gurus right now?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, there's a whole lot of them. Lane, yeah, Lane is like one of my inspirations. Um, so there's a couple big ones. The first one that I see a lot that alarms me a little bit is it's these elimination diets. So it's this information to like eliminate gluten, eliminate dairy. These things are inflammatory. And the wording is incorrect. So the use of the word inflammation and inflammatory is being thrown around very sort of loosely, without having the proper association with it. And it also causes a lot of fear mongering. So then, people, not just women, but people start thinking, oh, I have to take out gluten from my diet. I have to take out dairy from my diet, when really they have no reason to. And so some people might be like, well, what does it matter? So you take gluten out, so you take dairy out, big deal. Because these are very good potential sources of nutrition for people. Gluten products they could be really good protein sources. They could be really good fiber sources. Same with dairy. Dairy, especially for the postmenopausal women out there, it's a huge source of calcium. And so people are being fear mongered into avoiding foods that they don't have to avoid. So that's one of them. The other thing that really kind of gets me is a lot of the recommendations to people to heal, cure, or screen for diseases with these non-standardized tests that are natural, or they're less, invasive. And that's really worrisome because, in medicine, and when we talk about primary care and prevention, the tests that we use are very, very standardized. There's a reason why certain diseases have specific screening tests. There's also reasons why certain diseases don't have screening tests yet, because there are strict criteria that we look for when we implement a screening test to the public. So when you see people saying things like mammograms cause cancer, do like thermography instead, or what are some of the other ones? Do these at-home stool test kits to check for, parasites or cancer. Like, these are very dangerous recommendations, because people become fearful of the tests that, Western medicine has available that actually can pick up early cancers and cure disease. So that's another big one for me that I see a lot of on social media.
So there's two things that you brought up that are really good points. I want to dig in a little bit because I can relate on my side of things in the performance and strength and conditioning world. Is first, you talk about inflammation and understanding that that is a natural process that in some cases actually needs to happen and you want it to happen. And so
Yes,
like, and there's also the situation where like there can be two things right at the same time that seem opposing, right? So like inflammation can be bad if it's chronic and it's from certain stresses and so forth, but like inflammation after a workout is supposed to happen. And so like we hear about cold plunges being this huge popularized thing. Now cold plunges can be great, but if you do cold plunges and you're trying to gain muscle, well, they counteract each other because you're stopping that natural inflammatory process that allows muscle growth to happen. So both things can be right, and one thing doesn't have to be demonized for the other one to work. And so
exactly.
that's something that people don't understand, because it's easy to get for a soundbite or a quick clip to see this is good, this is bad. Now, the other thing
Exactly.
that I see also on my side of things that I think is really important that you bring up with the testing that we should lean into is the importance of understanding false negatives, right? So like
Yes.
for me as myself, right, I do an initial movement screening when someone comes in. And so people will question and debate the validity of this movement screen versus that one. But let's say I find that you have poor shoulder or hip mobility, whatever it may be. The
Mhm.
worst thing that happens if I have a false positive is you got some extra exercises and maybe I changed your workout a little bit, but we erred on the side of caution. But if I miss that because I don't have that, right? And I skip that because, oh, I say the movement screening is bullshit. And then I miss that. And now you go to press something overhead or go to do a squat and now you blow out your back or your shoulder. That's a false negative because I missed something that I should have picked up. And that's kind of important for what you're talking about, isn't it?
You got it. You hit the nail on the head. And so, we refer to those things like sort of in the epidemiology, or the world of statistics. It's your positive predictive value and your negative predictive value, and how accurate is that test to pick up those false positives, false negatives, or to not miss them. And I mean, again, when these tests that we have, similar to the way that you're performing your tests, they're specifically recommended because they've gone through those criteria, and we know that the tests that we have, they're low risk, and they're not going to miss too many positive people that are walking around with disease. And they're also not going to catch too many, they're not going to falsely label too many people who don't have disease. So it's a balance, right? And we can't, obviously no test is ever going to be 100%. But just like you said, it's very important to have that balance, to know what you're looking for, and to be able to pick up the cases and the instances where you are going to make a significant difference. So when you see things that are being recommended that are totally invalid, it's a little bit worrisome because, again, right, it's people can open up their phone. It's This information is there at the click of a button. And similar to what you were saying before about the inflammation, another big one there is cortisol, right? So everybody thinks cortisol is this, completely negative hormone that, it causes stress, it causes weight gain. But again, if we don't have cortisol, we die. Like, our adrenal glands, we need cortisol to survive. But it's so there's this misconception because people don't differentiate, they don't contextualize cortisol. It's chronic cortisol levels that can cause issues. But those acute cortisol levels, if we don't have cortisol, we don't survive. So you hit the nail on the head. It's, two things can be true. It's, are you putting this into context? And do you understand sort of the science behind these things? Or at least can you explain it and understand the nuance?
And then the other thing that's tough is when you're in situations where and we're on two different sides of the fence with this, but we also have to cover a lot of ground. We have to sometimes be a mile wide and not just a mile deep in what we're talking about. And it's really hard for us as professionals who do this for a living to figure out what's valid and what's not. How does the layperson even sort through who they can trust?
Yeah, and you know what? That's a great question. And I think that I used to actually be a little bit more intimidated with this kind of stuff because as a family physician, I'm kind of like a jack of all trades, but what's that saying? A jack of all trades, but a master of none, right? So my job as a family physician was to know a little bit about everything. I mean, in one day, I could have had a patient, I could be treating diabetes, depression, concussion, like a rolled ankle, and everything in between, a pregnant woman. So when I started in this space, it was like a light went off, and I'm starting to see all these people recommending all these things, and I thought, I don't even feel comfortable sometimes basing, saying something because I'm not even sure if I know enough to get on social media and post about something, and yet you see all sorts of people without credentials talking as if they're experts in these things. So I'm thinking, if it's difficult for me to figure out what's true and what's not, imagine the person who is dealing with an issue who's looking for information. So it can be very overwhelming. There are a couple of things that I do recommend now for people to look for if you're looking for somebody who you can trust online. And these are the things that I look for in people when I'm looking to learn about something online. So credentials is important. Okay. Now, credentials isn't everything because we know, you and I both know, that there are medical professionals online that are giving bogus advice and information, probably in the fitness world too. But credentials do stand for something most of the time. So it does help if you have somebody who has, credentialed in the area that they are speaking about. But there are other things. So somebody who is, I would say, who's trustworthy is going to be somebody who understands, number one, the context of the thing you're talking about or the subject you're talking about, and they can explain the nuances behind them. So oftentimes people will say, well, what's the deal with, let's say, gluten? And most of the time when there's a question that somebody asks, the answer is not simple. And if somebody's giving you a very like black or white answer, it's very like yes or no, that sometimes can be a red flag because science and medicine and health and wellness typically are not so cut and dry, right? There's a lot of nuance behind things. Something may work in one person's case but not in another person's case. And so if somebody doesn't understand the context and the nuance, to me that's a red flag. Something else is somebody who's very like all or nothing, so you hear a lot of these people who are influencers saying things like sugar is poison. Now the common one is that oatmeal and Cheerios are poison because they've got chemicals in them, right? And so again, that can be really, scary to somebody who doesn't understand that, first of all, doesn't understand that there's, a really big misinterpretation of the studies that they're talking about, that the person explaining this has not interpreted the study properly. But also, the whole idea of like the dose is the poison, right? And so, yes, if you have, artificial sweeteners is another recent one that's been out there a lot. If you're drinking, 40 cans of Coke, in an hour every day, then yeah, you're probably going to have too much artificial sweetener that can do something bad for you. But in the general public who are having 1 or 2 cans of Diet Coke a day, that's not going to harm you. So I would say, be very weary of people who are very strict and that have that all or nothing approach to things. Those would be my top red flags.
Yeah, the answer should always start with "it depends,"
Yeah,
99% of the time, right? Um,
exactly.
so and I like what you said as far as credentials, because you do have to realize that, like, the old joke is, what do you call the guy who got straight D's in medical school? Doctor, right? And
Yeah.
and then, let's talk about a little bit about scope of practice. As a fitness, professional performance coach, I have to deal with, and we talked about this on your show, where I have to compete with podcasters and influencers who don't have a fitness background. They've never trained anyone themselves, and they're dispensing exercise advice.
Right.
Now, on the flip side, I have colleagues who are in the fitness world who are now examining people's blood work, and they're giving hormonal advice. Like, how do you feel like about the crossover, and like, when does it become inappropriate?
Yeah, and I think that's a good question because I think, I think it's hard to not cross over at all. Like even in the content that I put out, in a previous life, I was an aerobics instructor. I took some courses. I mean, these are ancient now, but I've worked out along years. I've been doing strength training, so I have a pretty good basic knowledge now. Am I an expert in giving exercise advice? Absolutely not. So there's a difference between me saying to my group of women, for example, listen, guys, we need to start strength training. Deadlifts are excellent for lower body strengthening, for glute strengthening, for hamstring strength. Let's do some shoulder presses to protect that rotator cuff. That's different than me getting these women in a gym and, programming for them when I really don't have a clue what programming is like, or, being very, very specific there. So I think sometimes we can give general advice that may be a little bit out of our scope of practice, but we have to think about what are the consequences if that advice is incorrect, right? So if I'm going to coach somebody on how to do a deadlift, I better know how to do it properly, or I can hurt them, right? I can make them do it incorrectly, and then they get a back injury. And it's the same thing with the medical stuff. So you have to think about, is this general information that I'm giving, that even if it doesn't apply to this person, or if this person does take this information and apply it to them, is that going to harm them potentially in any way? And if the answer is yes, then that is out of our scope of practice. So for example, in my world, it's like I've seen a lot of influencers, particularly in the sort of nutrition space, talk about natural ways to treat your thyroid, and to be as, what's the word I want to say, ballsy, is that, am I allowed to say that? As saying to people, come off, you can come off your thyroid medication if you just do this, this, and this. And I'm there, scratching my head thinking, if this person comes off their thyroid medication, that can be a really significant source of medical, problems for them. So again, and that's different than saying to somebody, look, you've got this thyroid issue, you're on medication right now. Maybe you should speak to your doctor about the lifestyle changes you can make to support your thyroid health. That's different than telling somebody, all you have to do is, take some B12 for your thyroid. So I think that it's kind of hard and maybe a bit natural. It's hard not to go out of scope of practice a little bit, just because fitness and nutrition and diet, they're very intertwined. But I think a good resource, somebody who is really careful, is going to know where that boundary is.
Now, there's something I want to circle back to. So I like the point that you brought up as far as, like, what is the risk factor to say, okay, is this dangerous information? But then on the flip side, there's also, what is the opportunity cost if you don't share that information? So, like, let me give you a great example. So in my world, Twitter, I'm sure I always wonder, like, is accounting Twitter just as shitty as strength and conditioning Twitter? Because I can't think of a worse place in the world than when I follow some of the strength and conditioning stuff on Twitter. But,
Oh, it's a
like,
good thing I'm not on Twitter.
you see a lot of people who will, like, shoot arrows at people like Dr. Andrew Huberman when he dispenses his exercise advice. Now, when my clients ask me about his stuff, I said, well, look, that wouldn't be the program I would give you. right? And I think I could put together a whole lot better program than Andrew Huberman. But I'm also a really shitty neuroscientist too. So that's really
Right.
its place. But if because of his reach, he got someone to exercise that I'm never going to get to because I don't have those millions of followers that he has, then that is a win, right? When you have the
Right.
what 80-90% of the population doesn't exercise regularly to begin with. If he got somebody off the couch, and even if it was the not perfect program that the exercise geeks can argue about and shoot arrows at least he got them to do something, which is something that I might not have been able to do, or they might not be able to do because they don't have the reach that he has.
You got it. You got it 100%. You got it 100%.
Okay, so I want to circle back to the hormone thing. So we hear a lot about like, all right, this
Like,
type of exercise or this food or this ritual will boost a certain hormone. However, like from what little bit, the fingernails worth of information that I know about the endocrine system, it is incredibly complex. And that we need to kind of consider hormonal adaptations and not try to simplify them with such a reductionist approach. So talk a little bit about the
oh,
whole hormone thing and where we completely go off the rails trying to
yeah.
cherry pick certain hormones and certain activities.
Yeah, and hormones right now, I don't know why. It seems to be like hormones are the be all and end all in social media these days. It's like somebody said the word hormone once and the whole thing just exploded, which in a way is a good thing because I think that people are talking a lot more about specific hormones. Like, I think women's health and menopause is kind of benefiting from this a little bit. But you are right. The endocrine system, and I am not an endocrinologist. So again, I know a little bit about endocrinology. I'm not, I don't know it, I'm not an expert in any one particular hormone pathway, but the endocrine system is incredibly complex. And it's also incredibly tightly regulated by our body. So, number one, this is the first thing that I see happening with the discussion around hormones all the time that kind of drives me mad. It's the fact that people come on to social media and they talk about hormones and how hormones are affecting your weight and how hormones are affecting your mood. What hormones are we talking about? Right? When we're talking, and people will say, your hormones are making you gain weight. Well, there are specific hormones that are part of our satiety and our hunger pathway. Those are not the same hormones as the hormones that are affected through menopause. But people who don't understand hormones don't differentiate that. So then you have people thinking, well, it's my menopause hormones that are causing me to gain weight, when really they're talking about obesity hormones. So there's a huge confusion around what hormones we're actually talking about. And then oftentimes there's a massive oversimplification of it. You're right. And so, what you really need to do is find somebody who is an expert in hormone health. And a lot of times, for menopause, that might be an OB-GYN, and now there's a lot of information online. There's a lot of OB-GYNs online. You still have to be careful who you're looking for information. But people can take a very reductionist approach to this. And again, medicine and health is not that simple, right? It's very rarely is it, you make this one change and everything gets better. It's just not that simple. So if you have a particular issue, a particular problem, even if you think it's hormonal, it's very important that you speak to your physician, you speak to your specialist, and that if you're looking for sources of information online, that you're really sort of doing that with a bit of a scrutiny, I guess is the word.
Yeah, and so one of the things I talk to people about is how people make the mistake of making the jump from A to C. And what I mean by that is if A compound, shows that it increases B, and if B increases C, well, A must help C, right? So like an
Right.
example would be is if this supplement in a study showed it may, and I'm underlining may here, it may increase testosterone. Well, I know testosterone is involved in muscle growth. So if I take A, it must build muscle. It's not quite that simple.
Not quite that simple. Absolutely. It's never quite that simple. And I mean, again, that's where we have to look at the people who are experts in research and in understanding studies. I'll give you an example of something I was actually making a reel to debunk this morning about somebody stating that, there's been a study showing that peanut butter can help with anxiety, 3 tablespoons of peanut butter a day. That's a gross misrepresentation of first of all, what the study actually shows.
That would be
And
so awesome if it was true, though. I could
right,
eat I could eat a jar of peanut butter a day.
no, and I mean, think about how much happier people would be, right, if they could just eat peanut butter to help their anxiety. But again, it's this very reductionist, very overly simplified method that people use, like you said, to presume that if you do A, it'll affect C, and that's not the case a lot of the time.
Now, let's talk about the flip side is like taking the step back and understand, well, why do we even need C, right? And talking about sometimes it's not what you add, it's what you take away. And then we talk about, we kind of bring in all the complexity of everything to say, okay, well, if you have these anabolic things like testosterone, and then you have these catabolic things like cortisol, and you say, well, if I just take this and it'll increase my testosterone will help me build muscle. But what about the fact that your cortisol is so high that that's why your testosterone is not letting you build muscle, and your cortisol is so high because you sleep like crap, and you're
Right.
overstressed, and you drink too much, and you eat crappy foods? Like, we need to remove those negatives first. It's like a joke. One of my mentors, Gray Cook, would always say, like, it's like the guy who goes into to see you or sits down with a nutritionist, and he's smoking a Marlboro Red, and he's got a fifth of a whiskey in his hand, and says, "What's the best kind of omega 3s I should take?" Right?
Right, exactly.
We need to talk about like removing the negative first before we
Yes.
even think about adding things in.
Exactly. And again, right, that like what you're talking about, it's like some of the minutia we can really get stuck in these days. Like, don't eat don't eat this, and sugar is poison, and make sure that you're, cold plunging, and you're doing, and it's like, how about, are we eating enough fiber? Are we getting 7,000 steps in a day? Are you sleeping okay? Are you seeing a therapist to just manage your stress? Like, it's that a paralysis by analysis. Don't get stuck in the minutia and the things that may not make a difference. Just, stick to basic fundamentals, especially if you're just starting out.
Well, the other thing too, in one of our workshops, I have a slide, and it lists, I want to say, maybe 30 things that are recommendations that you're hearing now in the podcasting and biohacking worlds. And I say every one of these activities actually has validity and actually has benefit to it. But the problem is you get people who get so overwhelmed, and they look at that and they say, well, I don't have the perfect morning ritual, so I can't do that. So,
Right.
but I added all those 30 things up, and it takes 4 hours to do. So you go ahead
Right.
and tell a busy mom who's got to get lunches made, 2 kids off on the bus, and everything, and then get off to work, and then tell her, well, you have to get up, and you have to get in your morning sunlight, and you have to ground yourself, and you have to journal, and you have to do, like, I don't have 4 hours to start my day. If I'm a 20 something biohacker who's sponsored and lives in Southern California and single without
Right.
kids, yeah, that's great, but I'm not. So how do I manage that information, and give me something realistic that could be habits I can form?
And that's exactly what I try to teach women, right? It's like, I'm a mom, I'm a working mom. I get you. I've been there, I've done that. So, let's get all this nonsense out of the way. And how do I actually make you make some small changes that are actually going to affect your life for the better? That's my mission, because we can really get bogged down in this.
So going back, it kind of seems the easiest way to get clicks is just to demonize a certain food, type of exercise, diet,
100%.
whatever, right? But in reality, are there certain things that are like absolute no's that you tell your patients, like, these are the, like, before we get started, like, just know that these things need to get removed from your daily habits, or your whatever it is, your intake?
Well, I think that, in terms of like what foods to avoid and that you should never eat, there's two. There's foods that you're allergic to, and there's foods that you don't like. Essentially that's it. Or if you don't tolerate, right? So if for in terms of all the stuff that we're hearing about, don't eat this and don't eat that, and this is toxic and this is poison, if you're allergic to something or you don't like it, then don't eat it. But other than that, everything in moderation. And then I think there's just some really basic things, right? So smoking, right? We know unequivocally smoking is bad for you. So let's try to not smoke. And then I think the only other thing really is, sort of on the top of my head is, maybe this is more of a do than a don't, but just get some movement in. Don't be sedentary, right? Or figure out a way to get some sort of movement in. And you might have to be creative. It might just be little spurts here and there throughout your day. But I would say let's try to reduce the amount of sedentary behavior we have, because really when we look at quality of life and longevity, it's reducing the risk factors that we can control, and we do that by not smoking, maintaining a healthy weight, eating good food. And then there's the things that you can't control. So why stress over them? Your age, your gender, your genetics, your family history, right? Those are the things that we really can't do much about. So control the things you can control, and then, just try to do your best living a good, balanced life.
Hey, everybody, a quick break in the action here. Hope you're enjoying the show and we appreciate you listening. We're working hard to bring you the highest quality content and best guests every single week. So if you could do us a big favor and go and like and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you get your podcasts on, it would be greatly appreciated. Be sure to listen at the end of the show also to find out more information about our courses, as well as a special discount code for all our listeners. Thanks again, and let's get back to the show. So I want to come back to the healthy weight thing in a second, but I want to talk about the balanced life part and talk about like absolute no's that I try to teach people is that we cannot do this 110%, right? And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is we had Dr. John Berardi on, who was absolutely brilliant, and he gave some really cool information that he did on all of his precision nutrition people and had a huge cohort of thousands of people. And what he looked at was success and compliance. And he found that the biggest factor for success was that you just kept showing up, right? That
Hmm.
you just kept
Hmm.
coming back to the program, even if your compliance was lousy, like people who had as little as 20% compliance with the program, but yet kept coming back to it, still got results. Now,
Yep.
obviously, you got better results at 40% than you did at 20 and 60% versus 40. But once you got to that threshold of like 80 to 90%, being 100% on versus 80 or 90% on didn't make that much of a difference. It was a minuscule difference in the results. And, a lot of people would argue, and there's actually data that shows that the stress of trying to be 100% versus
Mhm.
80%
You
is
got it.
actually worse. And so I explained to people, look, we're going to go by the 80-20 rule. If you follow what I ask you to do, whether it's nutrition, whether it's exercise, you follow it 80% of the time, the other 20%, you can slack off. Now,
Yep.
if it's not happening fast enough or we have a deadline. So I work with some athletes that like they're not going to move back their tryout or their, opening day or whatever it is, just for them because they're not ready. So we may have to dial it up if it's not happening fast enough to maybe 90-10 or maybe 100%, but that's a
Right.
really short window. And that's for the most elite athletes in the world. So I can't
Right.
expect you to just jump off your couch and be 100% tomorrow, which is unfortunately what a lot of people do, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, and that's a recipe for disaster, right? So, and so that's one of my teaching points to my clients is that we're not. This is not going to happen overnight. You didn't get to the point where you needed me overnight, so it's not going to be undone overnight, and that's okay. And you know why that's okay? Because if you're doing it slowly, that means that you are developing habits. Because habits take time to develop and to make them part of your day. And so, if you're doing that correctly, it does take time. And you're right. I mean, unless there is an imminent medical issue, then we don't have to do this all overnight. And you're so right. If I tell them the only time you're going to fail, really truly, the only time you're going to fail is if you quit. If you just say, that's it, I'm done, I'm not even going to show up anymore. If you don't quit, guess what? The next meal you have today, you get to make a new decision again. The next time you're sitting down, pondering if you should go to the gym, you get to make a new decision. And you're right. It's initially, you kind of reminded me of like a lot of people are going to see that success very quickly at the beginning, and that's probably the most important. So if I can get a woman who's never lifted a weight in her life to get to the point where she's using 10-pound dumbbells for, let's say, upper body work, she's going to benefit more from that than, for example, me trying to get from, you know, a 95 push stroke to a 100-pound push stroke. Like that difference is going to be not, to me, not as significant as getting that woman who is obese, who is struggling, who has no strength in her upper arms. For her to go from that point to the point where she can just lift weight, that probably is so much more beneficial for her. So like focus on the little things, those little steps. If I'm sure you've read Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's one of my favorite books. Actually, I don't even know why I didn't read it for so long. I only read it a couple of years ago, but it to me, is probably one of the books that everybody who is trying to dial in their nutrition, their self-care, just good habits should read this book because it really emphasizes the fact that it's 1% every day. Just 1% every day makes a huge difference in the long run.
Yeah, great book. And another book along the same lines that I would recommend that I just finished recently is someone gave me The One Thing by Gary Keller. And
Oh,
it talks
I wrote
about
that down.
the domino effect, right? And understanding, and it talks about basically, okay, what's the one thing you could do today that gets you
Yes.
closer to what you want to be tomorrow, gets you closer to what you want to be in a week, and talking about the power of dominoes. And I was talking to this with a client last night. He came in with a ton. It's an athlete, really high level athlete, came in with a ton of musculoskeletal issues. And I gave him a program that was maybe 20 minutes a day. And I said, if I gave you something for every one of those musculoskeletal issues, it would have been a 4-hour program,
Yeah.
right? And you wouldn't have done it because it just would have been
Right.
too cumbersome. But if I am good and I can sharpshoot the right domino, what they found with dominoes is that if you hit the right one, or if you hit a domino, just any domino, it can knock over the next domino, even if it's 50% larger, right? And so if
Mm,
you have a 2-inch domino, it can knock over a 3-inch domino, and it goes exponential. So if you do this geometric progression, a 2-inch domino, by the 31st domino, you'd knock over Mount Everest, right? Something
right.
about
Yeah.
3,000 feet high. So it's about getting that lining up. And then there's also the real art of coaching. And we've had a lot of great
Yes.
guests on and talked about this. And you lean into this very well into your content, is that understand that it's not just the X's and O's of macronutrients and reps and sets. It's also that, especially in the demographic you're working with, there's fear, there's guilt, there's all these things that come along with it. And being able to teach them to have grace with themselves, that
Hmm.
it's okay if you have that Reese's cup is not going to ruin everything you've done to this point.
Right. Right. Yep. 100%. 100%.
Okay, so um, let's go back to talking about professional recommendations. As a medical doctor, you're obviously, as you've said already, and you see on your content, you're a huge proponent of exercise and you practice what you preach. Unfortunately, this isn't the norm in your profession, right? How do we get more medical professionals to better understand and appreciate the power of exercise? So, like, I think Peter Attia might have said it very well, or said that if you walked into, like, back in the days when you'd have the drug reps coming in to sell you the drugs and say, if I have a drug that can reduce inflammation long term, can reduce medical signs of depression, can increase muscle mass, can increase longevity, reduce heart risk, like the list goes on and on. I have it all in one thing. You'd be like, nah, this is bullshit. There's no way
Yeah.
there's that. But it does. It's called exercise.
Yeah.
So it's the most powerful drug in the world. Why are we not recommending it more in medical offices?
Okay. Here's my honest answer. Because medical professionals and physicians struggle with the same things that everybody else struggles with. You know what I'm saying?
I
We
totally know
know
what you're
medical.
saying. I had left actually the one family doctor I used to go to, because when I would go in for my physical, Doriana, my entire time with him was him telling me about his workout. And is this good? Is this good? Is this good? I'm like, what about me? Like,
Yeah,
all he
I'm
did
the
was talk about his
patient.
workout the whole time.
Oh my gosh, that's too much the other way.
Mm.
But and I've seen this, right? I've seen physicians, and I mean, these are family doctors prescribing cholesterol medications. These are cardiologists prescribing blood pressure medication. I've seen registered dietitians that are suffering from obesity. Why? If we know this information, why aren't they applying it? Because they suffer with the same struggles that everybody else struggles with. They're struggling maybe with some mental health issues. Maybe they're struggling with family issues. Maybe they are genetically predisposed to certain things and it makes it harder for them. Maybe they don't have a good support system. Maybe they're caring for elderly parents. So it's easy for us to look and say, you should be doing this because you teach this. But what we really need to look at is, are these people any different from anybody else in the population? And if you're a surgeon who is doing rounds at 7 in the morning, then you're in your clinic all day, or you're doing surgery till 4 o'clock, then you have to pick up your kid from daycare. They have the same 24 hours in the day that everybody else does. So, how do we make it feasible for them? It's the same way I would make it feasible for somebody else. They know exercise is important, they understand that it's the ability to apply it to their life, and that's the piece that's missing. Because again, I see this in my clients, right? Well, I don't have time to go to the gym, so I just don't go. But who said you have to go to the gym to get a workout in, right? To these busy moms that I have, or these postmenopausal women who are, who've never stepped into a gym and find it really intimidating. You don't have to go to a gym. You can get steps in going up and down your stairs. You can go, you can do 1,000 steps in your home between your Zoom calls if you're working from home. So I think that even for the medical professionals, we have to look and really, it's about troubleshooting their struggle points, their pain points, and then coming up with a solution that works for them. And that's why I don't give meal plans in my program, because I don't know what time you eat. I don't know what foods you like to eat. I don't know how I don't know if you're a night shift worker. So again, that's the beauty of coaching, is that I get to sort of have a little sneak peek into your day, see what your schedule is like, see what your lifestyle is like, and then we make solutions based on that. It's not a cookie cutter approach. And with physicians and medical professionals, it's the same thing.
So to your point, one of the things that as I've started to launch my own virtual coaching programs, one of the things that my clients, especially because I'm really focused on guys over 40, is that they love, because they're dealing with a lot of same issues, time and not enough ability to do what they would like to do. And I think we've also, and to take the blame for my world and take the blame for the exercise profession, we've done a really shitty job of making you think that you have to go to a special place and it has to be an hour, it has to be all these different things. And we've scared more people off exercise with that than we brought them in. And so one of the things they
Right.
love the most is I have in my app, I have exercise snacks. I have movement snacks that are
Love.
more mobility. I have HIIT snacks that here's a high intensity workout. It takes you 9 minutes during your lunch
Yep.
break. Go and do this, right? There's been research that shows if you take people in one group, the control group did 30 minutes of cardiovascular exercise. The other group did 3 10-minute bouts, breakfast, lunch, dinner type of deal.
Yep.
And that group had higher compliance and had just as good results. So we don't
Yep.
have to make these containers of 60 minutes that are fictitious, that are kind of made up to get the results that we want to have. And so I think giving people realistic things that they can work off of is a much better approach if you're going to
Yep.
get the compliance and buy-in. Now,
100%. 100%.
I'm bouncing all over the place, but you said a word that I jotted a note down I wanted to circle back to, is you said, and this is a loaded term, Doriana, healthy weight. Okay, so
Ah, yes.
now we're living in the Ozempic world, right? And you
Yes.
have a lot of
Yes.
people, right, that are walking around and they're what I call skinny fat, right? And they
Yes.
think they've done something to benefit their health. Now, again, two things can be right at the same time. If you went from 400 to 300, you might have reduced some significant risk in your life. If you
Right.
went and lost those 20 pounds to drop a few dress sizes and now you're gaunt and you gave away a lot of muscle, you've actually made yourself more unhealthy. And there's a lot of data out there that shows if you had to pick to be a little bit overweight versus sedentary, I'll take the a little bit overweight any day of the week.
Yes. Love this question. I actually love talking about this because the word the word obese has been redefined. And when we talk about, when I was being trained in medical school, we used the BMI. That was how we defined obese. So I would have a patient come in for their physical, we would do their weight and their height, and I would say, you are obese, you are overweight, or your weight is okay, based on that one number. Well, now we've had years of research and data showing us that that is not the case. And exactly for what, because again, I would be sitting in my office looking at a very lean, muscular, let's say male patient, and their BMI would say they're obese, but I'm looking at them thinking, there's no way they're obese. They don't have any fat on them, they're all muscle. So when we talk about a healthy weight, there are some things that define a healthy weight. Your healthy weight is where your physical weight, so the number on that scale, and the amount of fat tissue that you're carrying is not having any negative impact on your health. Meaning, you don't have high cholesterol, you don't have high blood pressure, you don't have joint pain. So your weight is not contributing in a negative way to your health. It's the weight where you feel good and you can be active. It's the weight where you feel comfortable, you feel confident. So your healthy weight is not only defined by your BMI anymore. And the word obesity has now also gotten a slightly different definition. So obesity is carrying excess weight that is causing medical comorbidities, like I said before, cholesterol, diabetes, joint pain. So you could technically have a BMI. I actually just did a reel about this, a post about this. You could have a BMI that is in the old world obese number, but if that person does not have any medical conditions that are related to that extra weight, then they are not considered obese at that moment in time. Now, there's again, right? This is where the nuance and the context comes in. Can they always stay in that category as non-obese with that weight? Not necessarily. We know that carrying excess weight for a long period of time can eventually cause issues down the road. But again, it's looking at this sort of, in a broader context, along a broader timeline. So if we can get you to a point where your weight is, not causing you any medical problems, and you're active, and you're energetic, you're sleeping well, then yes, you can be carrying an extra 10, 15 pounds, but still be very healthy.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up BMI. I actually had a good friend of mine who's around my age who called me freaking out saying his doctor said his BMI was high and he's got to drop weight. Meanwhile, this is a guy who's going to be doing, he's told me he signed up for 8 obstacle course races, including an ultra one this year. He teaches spin a couple times a week. He's in the gym 4 or 5 days a week lifting. So
Right.
the last thing I'm worried about is your BMI. And then what people don't realize, I always remember reading a paper on the flip side, is that anorexics, if an anorexic dies from the disease, they actually have an incredibly high percentage of body fat when they die because they've given away all their lean tissue.
Because they have no muscle, right? And actually, so just quickly, based on, because of what you said earlier about the Ozempic, and I think you kind of bring up a really important point. Ozempic and the medications that are available now for weight loss, these are wonderful drugs. They can do wonderful things, and they can help wonderfully. They have really good effects, but they have to be used in the correct population. We are not supposed to be giving Ozempic to people to lose 15 pounds so that they can fit into that dress or wear a bikini on their vacation. These medications have criteria that are supposed to be met in order for a patient to take them. And part of that criteria is they meet the new definition of obesity, meaning they have a medical complication that is directly related to their weight. That is the appropriate patient for Ozempic if they choose to go that route. And that, I think, initially, especially, it was like, well, everybody can just take Ozempic to lose, their 10 to 15 pounds. That's not how those medications are supposed to be used. And you're right on the flip side is that you can have people who look very lean. They're not overweight at all, but they don't have, they're missing the lifestyle habits. And so they may actually have high LDL cholesterol, or they don't have that muscle. They don't have muscle tissue to protect their bones and prevent osteoporosis down the road. So it's a very complex system, right? When we talk about weight and and your numbers and your labs and your strength, right? It's everything all together. It's not one or the other.
Okay, speaking of labs and testing and the integration of what we're talking about into medicine, into modern medicine, there's some really strong data that talks about some of the biggest correlations with longevity, and yet VO2 max being one of the biggest ones, right? Looking at simple things like grip strength having an insanely high correlation with mortality.
Yep.
Basic body weight strength. So like how much more powerful could my yearly physical be if I could somehow gather some of that information? I mean, a grip dynamometer is $40 for a digital grip
Yeah.
dynamometer that you could get. And if you added that in and you saw trends or things that you would see in a physical that could be just as important markers as that blood pressure or cholesterol, why are we
Right.
not using some of these powerful tools?
Right. And I mean, again, that's probably just, I don't know. I don't know how these, you look at the task forces and what they recommend we as physicians do in our physicals. I mean, we don't even technically do physicals in Ontario anymore. We do screening visits. But all that aside, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you at all. I think a lot of these things would be really beneficial. And when we talk about the grip strength, it's not that your hands have to be strong and that makes you live longer. Your grip strength, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your grip strength is an indication of how strong you are in general. So that comes into, if I have an elderly patient who falls and breaks their hip, we know that they have a significantly higher risk of dying from that hip fracture, simply because they fractured a hip. So that grip strength goes into, can you fall and recover? Can you prevent the fall because you have good mobility, good strength, good balance? And so, yeah, these are definite markers of longevity. And like I said, I don't disagree with you. I think they would be really helpful. It's just a matter of getting that into sort of the protocol, right? And that's a big sort of admin and kind of That's the admin side of things.
Yeah. So, and you're absolutely right. It's not just how strong are my fingers and hands. It's looking at. I tell people, I look at it for three reasons. One, on the most global level, yes, it's just how robust you are. And I know that there's once you get below certain markers, just like with VO2 max, like there's a great scale that shows like once you get below a certain mark, you can't live independently. And so, yes, at the high end, we look at that and for performance, but on the low end, it's can you even live independently and do the daily tasks? So
Right,
that's the lowest hanging fruit. The second thing that you can gain is if you see significant asymmetries right to left in grip, that's usually an indication that there's something going on in either the shoulder and or neck, because every nerve that feeds into your hand and grip comes through there. And so almost
right,
every time I see a huge asymmetry, there's some sort of dysfunction going on there. So if I can catch that early and say, hey, we need to get this checked out, or maybe it's something we can clear up with just exercise, that may save you from that shoulder and neck surgery that might have been 10 years down the road that we can get an
right,
early sign of there. And then on the most micro level is it's again driven by your nervous system. So I can get a little bit of gauge into your readiness. So when I see my clients on a regular basis, I'll have them do the grip strength at the beginning of the session. And I'll say, okay, well, normally you're somebody that pulls 90 pounds and now you're at 70. And I said, okay, well, what's going on? How did you sleep? How's your, oh, well, I stayed up too late, or I'm stressed out, or I maybe had too many drinks at the party last night. And now all of a sudden I have to be smarter about my training program, and it allows me a little window into that. So it's a little bit of
right.
gauge into so much that can be gauged out of that. But as we're running up against, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about your population, and it's busy women that you're working with, and so talk about how and why you think so many women struggle finding like this health and fitness plan that works for them and addresses their needs.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is just, all the mixed messaging that women, I say women, but again, that's my population. I think there's been a lot of mixed messaging. There's been a lot of toxicity in diet culture. So, there's this sort of it's all or none thinking, right? You have to get to the gym. Well, I can't, so I'm just not going to bother. You have to look like this. Well, I can't look like that, so forget it. I'm just going to give up and eat what I want. So a lot of that all or nothing thinking can really actually just make people give up and quit altogether. But I think for the most part, it's the common things that women experience. It's the fatigue, just from taking care of their children, their spouses, having to give of themselves to their workplace and to their career. Especially now, we're living in a time when women are reaching for really high positions, and it takes a lot of work to do that. So there's limited time. So the time, the fatigue at the end of the day, and it's just, again, it's figuring out where can I put these things if I don't want to, like things like meal prep, things like exercise. If I don't want to sacrifice my work or my career, or I have to make sure my kids are taken care of and fed and all that kind of stuff. And then the big one is not feeling guilty about it, right? So women are paralyzed by guilt. So I could exercise today. I have 20 minutes, but my kid needs this. And so I do that instead because otherwise I'll feel guilty. I could exercise for 20 minutes, but my boss asked me to do this, and so I feel bad if I don't get it done. So a lot of this is teaching women that it's okay to take care of themselves. In fact, it's necessary. And we don't just have to tell women they have to take care of themselves so that they can take care of other people. You have to take care of yourself because you deserve to be taken care of. Because you don't lose who you are the minute you become a boss, a mom, a wife, right? You still deserve to be healthy and energetic and agile. And so it's really, really trying to get that message home with my population. And that takes time. It takes repeat messaging and repeated messaging over and over again.
I love that. Now, as someone who's now also kind of leaning into that same demographic, but on the male side, is from the mental approach to it is it's changed somewhat over time, but not enough. In that, even if I look back at pictures of my grandparents and what they look like at my age and kind of what their expectations were, they were much more not only comfortable kind of going to the rocking chair early, but they also expected it. And
Yes.
so the false talk a little bit about the false expectations of, well, I'm 50, so this is supposed to happen. Oh, well, I'm, 60, this is supposed to happen. When quite frankly, there's people, that are out there not only calling bullshit on it, but they're doing it. People like yourself, people like the clients that I'm working with that are still doing triathlons in their 60s, that are still playing competitive tennis, that are still really doing the things that they want to do. And it just takes the right approach, that you don't have to kind of, as you said, and this is a big point, give up your identity of who you used to be.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And you know what? At the end of the day, listen, we could live the healthiest lifestyle. We could do all the right things and still we can become sick or disabled or, something can happen. But why do we want to throw in the towel if we don't need to? Right. It's like hold on to that quality of life as long as possible. Um, and that it serves you well, it serves your family well because they don't have to, take care of you. You get to retain your independence, you get to retain your joy. So it's kind of like an everybody wins.
Yeah, one of the things that I talk with my clientele about is part of your responsibility with this, and there really is a responsibility on your part, that it's as you get to that threshold, it's not just about how much for my guys, it's how much you can bench, or do you have six pack abs. It's a responsibility to the people around you to not be a burden. And not be a
Yes.
burden that they're taking you to doctor's offices, all the time, or that you can't do the things that you want to do. And in the webinar that I have, I show a picture of me with my boys. We just went to Italy last year on a dream vacation, and we got to mount to hike the mountains in Cinque Terre, and it was unbelievable. But
Hmm.
I not only would my kids not have been able to do that, I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't take care of myself the way I did. And if they had to worry about
Absolutely.
dad's heart or dad's ankle or dad's, back, everybody misses out on that. So it's just kind of your responsibility to not be a burden on the people around.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you.
All right, so we're getting up against it with time, and I could keep you all day. And so, as I said earlier, this is kind of why sometimes when Mike's not here, I can really lean into stuff. But let's talk about what you're focusing on now with your coaching program, and kind of what projects you have coming up in the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah, this is really new for me. So I feel like I don't know, I really do, I'm open to all sorts of ideas for the next, 6 months, 6 years. But right now, really my focus is trying to build my clientele because I'm really, really passionate about trying to help as many women as I can. And the joy that I get when I hear my clients tell me, like, one of my clients said the other day, she's lost 40 pounds. She said she finally, after years, was able to do an unassisted squat. Like that, it almost brought tears to my eyes, right? She sent me a picture of her weights that she was using while she was on vacation. She's working out on vacation. Like these are amazing things. And so I really just want to keep building, keep growing my clientele, keep launching my group programs. I do private and semi-private as well, but mostly it's my group programs because I see how beneficial it is for women to learn how to do this stuff the right way. And really it's that, and it's, I'm trying to grow my podcast baby. So I'm always looking for people to have on my podcast because I get a lot of information from my podcast guests. I actually learn a lot from my podcast guests. And of course I like to disseminate that information to my audience too. So really it's my podcast, it's my clientele, and then just my content, putting out good information that makes people feel a little bit easier, like at ease about this whole thing, and feel a bit more reassured that they can actually do it.
Well, kudos on all the great work you're doing, and keep it up. And we'll have the links to everything up on the show notes. And we're also going to be posting, highlights of this all throughout the week, because there's going to be a ton of them in there. And so want to thank you again for your time. Greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you so much for having me again. It was a pleasure to talk again.
Absolutely. And we want to thank you for listening. And this has been the Principles of Performance Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Principles of Performance Podcast. If you've enjoyed our content, please like and share on your social media outlets, as well as subscribe and give us a review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your preferred platform is to listen to. For more information on the Principles of Program Design courses and workshops, visit us at www.principlesofprogramdesign.com and follow us on all of the social media channels where we post new content every day. To save 10% on any PPD courses, enter the discount code PRINCIPLESPODCAST10 at checkout. If you have any questions we can answer or suggestions for the show, you can email us at info@principlesofprogramdesign.com or message us on social media. Thank you again for your support.